Hi everyone, it's Sophia, and in this presentation I'm going to be going over all the assignments that we did and explain how I completed them throughout my placement. So the first project that we did this semester was the unit foundation, and I was in a 4th grade class, and I did it on informative and explanatory texts. And one thing that's important to know is that I use the Titanic as a model for teaching this. So throughout the whole unit, we were focused on the Titanic. So yeah, let's dive into it. This is what my unit foundation looked like, and my two goals that I had for the students were students will be able to compare a historical nonfiction event to a fictional depiction of that same event, and students will be able to draw information from a text to use in writing informative and explanatory texts about a topic. This unit foundation is something that I found myself referring back to a lot while completing assignments throughout the semester. The enduring understandings allowed me to make sure I was hitting what I wanted to in my lessons and assessments. Even though this was the first project we completed, it was the one I referred back to the most. Our next assignment was the curriculum matrix. The curriculum matrix is really good for differentiating instruction. This combines Bloom's taxonomy and Gardner's multiple intelligences. Once you get to know your students and their assets, this is a perfect thing to look at to find an activity that would best suit them. It is also a great tool to add to your portfolio to pull out at interviews when they ask how you differentiate your instruction. The next step was to create an assessment plan. In order to do this, I had to come up with a pre-assessment, a formative assessment, and a summative assessment. Click through the following slides to learn more about what I did. For my pre-assessment, I simulated a role-play situation with my students. Since we were using the Titanic as a means of teaching this unit, I had different slips of paper with different passengers on it, like a first-class passenger, a woman, a child, etc. Every student had the class period to look up that passenger's role at the time of the Titanic sinking. They then had to write a paragraph summary as if they were that passenger and include a citation. I think this was an effective way for me to measure where the students were at and to help guide my future instruction. This pre-assessment also gave students an idea of how our perspective of an event could change depending on the person. I used a checklist to document strengths and needs amongst the students. My pre-assessment was an engaging way to introduce my students to the idea of informative and explanatory writing, especially with regards to the Titanic, and also give me an idea of where students stood with their writing skills. My formative assessment took place throughout my unit. Throughout the unit, students were developing their comparisons and contractions of the clips of the movie Titanic that we watched and the research they had been doing. They kept their information on a Venn diagram and their citations on a mapped-out Word page. Since the students were doing the majority of their research in class, I could really take the time to walk around and do formative assessments both formally and informally. I observed all of my students every day when they were working on this. I wanted to make sure they were understanding how to cite and what the purpose of writing informative and explanatory texts was. I also conferenced with my students throughout. By observing and having my conferences with students, it allowed me to keep track of what students were getting it and who was not. It also allowed me to look for common errors in writing patterns. The students eventually turned their Venn diagrams into an essay, so it was important they were understanding the fundamentals. At the end of my unit, students wrote an informative essay on how the movie Titanic compared to the actual sinking of the Titanic. For this assignment, students were required to use authentic resources to guide their essay and include an MLA Works Cited page. I chose to have students write an essay for their summative assessment because I believe this captured everything that the students would need to know and do in order to meet the standards. They also focused on pulling out key information that they had found in their research to include in their papers. I did my student profile on a student in my class who has ADHD. I wanted to complete my profile on him because he could be very smart if he would stay focused. Doing the different parts to this assignment helped me get to know my student both as a person and as a student, and also help him succeed. This will be helpful to complete with many students in my future classroom. The next 2 slides include artifacts from my profile. Oops. My total talent portfolio was one of the most helpful projects I've done. One part of the TTP is interviewing the students' parents. I found this to be such an informative guide when getting to know my student and his values. My student is very smart in school subjects but struggles socially. Although time-consuming, it was rewarding to work with my student and his family to create an action plan that I know best suits him. Scroll through the next few slides to gain a better insight on the work I did with my student. My first lesson plan was my pre-assessment. The objective of this lesson was that students will understand how one event could differ from person to person. I had 3 homogeneous groups of students. One shared a poster at the end, one a PowerPoint, and one put on a skit. This was my first time that I ever used tier groups, and I really enjoyed it. My second lesson plan involved students writing a research paper comparing and contrasting the movie clips that we've seen of the Titanic to what their research has said. Since this was a primarily independent activity, I as a teacher served as a proctor supporting student learning. The data analysis was a perfect way to tie everything I've done this semester together. Having all of my students' data on a graph allowed me to really see who met the objectives and who did not. Overall, I found this class to be very helpful, and I learned a lot about differentiating my instruction.